Is programming your GMRS radio keeping you from using it to its full potential? Stick around and we'll get you up and running using your CPS. Hi, and welcome to the Gadget Talk channel, where we do reviews and how-tos on a variety of electronic gadgets that catch my eye. In this video, we'll be getting you up to speed on how to program your GMRS radio to get the most from your transceiver. As we get started, if you find this video helpful, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to the Gadget Talk channel. If you're in the market for a GMRS radio, please take a look at some of the links in the video description below. Using the links results in some sales commissions to the channel. The Radioddity links provide you with a $15 discount off a $65 purchase. There's a bit of overlap in this video and a recent video I did on GMRS repeaters. That video focused on repeaters with a bit of programming info. In this video, we'll dive a bit more deeply into CPS programming. I'll link the repeater video in the description below. In their basic form, GMRS radios come with 22 channels that come in 3 banks and have different power output limits. Channels 1 through 7 have 5-watt limits. Channels 8 through 14, sometimes called the interstitial channels, have half-watt limits, and channels 15 through 22 have 50-watt limits. Small handheld transmitters aren't going to output that much power, but base stations and mobile rigs with antennas that can be mounted away from the operators certainly can. Channels 23 through 30 are repeater channels and are especially programmed in the radio to broadcast and receive on separate, yet predefined frequencies. These channels also allow up to 50 watts of power. Basic radios are easy to use and allow you to simply tune a channel and talk. The FCC requires radios certified under Part 95 of the FCC regs to have channels that users can't input the frequencies directly. They're baked into the radio. Manufacturers started adding what some call privacy codes to their radios to make it easier for users to filter out the transmissions other than those with the proper privacy code. These settings don't hide transmissions. They simply cause your radio not to pass the transmission without your selected code on to the radio's speaker. You normally can easily set those codes using the radio's menu system and keys on the radio's faceplate. In practice, however, setting those codes isn't very helpful unless you're in an area where GMRS channels are super busy. Most of the time, if there are others on the channel you're using, it's often easier just to tell your radio partner or group to switch to another channel. So, if basic GMRS operations is all you're looking to do, nearly all radios are ready to go right out of the box. Most GMRS radios, including inexpensive HTs or handheld transceivers, have some advanced features that are, at least in my opinion, easier to set using the Customer Programming Software, or CPS. These include the GMRS repeater channels and, in many cases, do-it-yourself repeater channels. As expected, these channels allow you to connect to GMRS repeaters. Again, I'll link to my video on GMRS repeaters in the description below and end card to this video. CPS software is often matched to a specific radio brand and model, but fortunately, nearly all CPS programs work the same way, and that's what we'll be showing you today. So, where do you find the CPS for your radio? In most cases, you'll find a link to a program download on your radio's online sales page from your retailer, or in some cases, from the radio's manufacturer's support and download section on their webpage. In some cases, the programs will come in a zip or RAR or RAR file format. You'll need to decompress the files into a folder on your computer. If you don't have a decompression program, you can find a free one on the cnet.com downloads page. Search for a zip file extractor. In other cases, the CPS will simply be an executable file that you can run directly. In many cases, you'll get a Windows security warning. If you got the file from the retailer or the manufacturer, run it anyway. Before we get to the software, let's talk a second about connecting your radio to the computer. First, you'll need a programming cable. For most HTs, it will be one with a USB-A connector on one end and a K connector on the other. The K connector will fit into the microphone and speaker sockets on the side of the radio. For some mobile or base station radios, the connector on the radio side will be a 3.5 millimeter plug. Many USB cables have chips in the A side of the cable to translate the data signal from the computer into sound signals that the radio expects from the mic connector. Same thing on the speaker side going to the computer. Inexpensive cables can be had for about $8 and usually have a Prolific brand chip. More expensive cables have an FTDI chip instead. My experience is that the no-name cables sometimes have knockoff chips that don't work very well. I have an FTDI cable that's worked with all my HTs, regardless of brand. Again, I'll put some links below. The next thing you need to be aware of is that the software expects to receive data through a specific communications or COM port on your computer. If you have the COM port set wrong, the CPS won't be able to connect to your radio. To verify your COM port, use the Windows search box in the lower left of your screen and search for Device Manager. Click it to open, expand the list under Ports, and with the cable connected and the radio turned on, you should see an entry labeled USB COM port with a parenthesis with the word COM and a number. That's the port number you'll choose in the CPS. Write it down so you don't forget. You can then close the Device Manager. Now, with all the connection stuff out of the way, let's jump into the software. As I said earlier, nearly all CPS software I've used works the same. The choices might be slightly different and the fonts may change, but what you're programming stays pretty much the same. Let's get started. So in this display, I'm using the programming software for the GM-30 handy talkie from Radioddity. And I'm using this because it has a couple of aspects to it that I'll get to in a few minutes that represent, two of the basic ways to program repeaters. And so they're both embedded in this same software. So we'll use it and we'll show both of them to you. At the top, we've got the basic Windows kinds of menus with File, Save As, and so forth. And in the program, we have the read from, write to radio, as well as the communications port. In View, I've got them all checked. This is the tree, this is the toolbar, and then there's a status bar that is displayed. And then we can either cascade or tile the various windows. And when we get to help, there's just a help about that gives you a version number. And that's pretty common with all of these CPS programs. Now here are icons, the typical Windows kind of thing. This is a file open, this is a save, this is a read from the radio. The little arrow, if you can see it, is pointing away from the radio, and this is a read to the radio. The little arrow is pointing at the radio. So there are a couple of displays that we're going to be looking at, and first we'll look at radio information. In this case, it's nothing we want to change, but it has the frequencies for the GMRS channels and then the scan frequency range, which is important to us, and you can see it has both the VHF and UHF frequency bands listed there. So before we go to the channel display in detail, let's connect the radio. First, as we've already described, we want to go to Program and to the Communications port. We've looked at our device manager, and we know that on this computer, the COM port that is used is COM port 4, so we'll select COM port 4. If you have a failure to read from your radio, it's most likely that you've not completed this step properly. The next thing we're going to do is, again, we're going to go to Program and we're going to read from the radio, or we could just press this little icon. The Read from Radio dialog box appears, and you can see from the progress bar that we're reading data from the radio. The radio's gone into program mode, and the little LED on the top of the radio is flashing green. So with the channel display back on the screen, the information that we have here is the information from the radio. The next thing we're going to look at is general settings, and then the general settings just provide you with a number of things that apply to the radio itself. These are generally all available through the faceplate programming in the menu with your radio, but they can be a little easier to do here if you're going to be in the CPS regardless. So you can see we can change the welcome wording, we can put on voice alerts, we can sound the alarm. In this case, it's on site. On site means that there'll be a little siren in the radio, but it won't broadcast. These will send either the sound, the siren sound, over the radio, which I don't want to do, or send a code. You can set the Vox, which is the feature that allows you to just talk at the radio and it'll start to transmit. Generally, I keep the Vox off. You can set the battery saver mode and some of these other things to include the radio's beep, the Roger beep, and then the display. In this case, I've got it set for name and number, but you could set it for frequency and number should you choose. And so those are just basics. Different programs will have different boxes, but will most likely include all of these boxes. They may have a few less or a few more. We're going to spend most of our time in the channel box. So we'll go to channel and we get this box right here. And as you can see in this display, the areas that you cannot make changes to are grayed out. And so we've got the GMRS channels, 1 through 7, which have a 5-watt limit. So we've got wideband set to high. We can make changes if we want to, but we really don't want to. The interstitial channels are 8 to 14. Those are set for 0.5 watt, so low power here, and a narrow bandwidth, and that's required by regulation. And then we've got 15 to 22, which are the upper level GMRS channels. They're set to wide band and high power, and those can be used up to 50 watts. Now, obviously, a little HT is not going to output 50 watts, but your base station or mobile station might. In all of these, you can make changes to things like busy lockouts, which means that if the radio senses that there's something happening on that channel, it won't let you transmit. You can add it to your scan list or not. You can set the frequency hopping code on this particular brand, which is kind of a unique thing that doesn't mean what you think it does. And so we're going to leave that all off. And so all of these changes you can make mostly with drop-down boxes, but like here with this name, you could change the name to be GMRS4 or something else. If you have a favorite channel for your family, you could change it to family. It can be changed to anything, but the frequencies can't be changed. And then with this particular display, that may or may not be on the CPS for your model, you can click these little double carets over here and get all of that information in a little box. So instead of working your way across the screen, you can work with those same variables here in the channel edit box. Now, when we get down here into the range for channel 23 through, in this case, channel 54, you can make some repeater inputs. And so 23 to 30 are the standard radio repeater inputs, and they're labeled here as repeaters 1 through 7. And you'll notice that repeater 1 has a receive frequency in your radio. In other words, the frequency the repeater outputs on is 462 5500, which is the same as channel 15, 462 5500. So the repeater is going to output in the channels that are listed here, 15 through 22. So repeater 1 through 8 is the first bank of repeaters, and those are easy to program in the various CTCSS codes. So for example here, the receive code, which would be the output code from the repeater, is listed as none. If you click it, you get a drop-down box, and you can put in any of the CTCSS codes. And if you scroll down far enough, you'll get into the various DCS codes. And those are really easy to do on your radio handset. And so for these first 8, I'd recommend just putting the CTCSS codes in with your radio, and then using these as a kind of a test channel, so that you know that these channels are matched properly. And so you can get the receive and you can put the transmit in there. That way, if you're traveling and you happen to show up at some city or town and you wanted to use your radio, you could use an app like repeaterbook.com or mygmrs.com to find a repeater in that town that has open access, and then you can just put the codes in there and make it really easy to do to access that repeater. Down here we have the do-it-yourself repeater channels, however, and they work a little different, and it's really pretty cool. So here you can see that repeater channel DIY1 has got that 462 5500, and if you come down here to DIY9, 8 channels lower, you've got 462 5500, and if you go 8 more channels down, you've got 462 5500 on DIY17, and so you essentially have 4 banks, 3 banks of DIY channels and 1 bank of the standard repeater channels. In some CPS, this is all you're going to be able to do. So if you want to have 4 repeater channels with different codes, you'd have to put them on, for example, DIY1, DIY9, and so forth. You'd set the codes, and then you would make the other changes here that you want. And so that makes it really easy to do. And then with CPS that have a different DIY scheme, which this CPS has both, by the way, you might also then be able to use a drop-down box and pick the repeater channel that you want to use. That way, if there were 6 repeaters in your area that used 462 5500 as their outputs, you could program all of those in sequential channels and then name them something that is meaningful to you by typing the name in here in the name box with the appropriate codes set here, again mostly being chosen by a drop-down box, not with typing in numbers, just to avoid mistakes. And you could have those 4 repeaters all grouped together. So those are the 2 primary things you're going to notice with CPS software. Some are going to give you the standard repeater channels and then, up to 24 additional do-it-yourself channels, but they're blocked, or others are going to give you the ability to make changes as we just saw. So for example, the BaoFeng UV9G has these same channels, but they're locked. You can't do a drop down and make the change. You have to change via the assigned channel. And so it's just another way that particular manufacturer chose to implement DIY channels to maintain compliance with the regulations. Now you'll also notice here that these are grayed out, so you can't change them. But if you change over here, and let's make a change to 462-6000, when we click out of it, you can see that the 467 is now 6000 as well. That's called the offset. Repeaters in the GMRS world expect a frequency 5 megahertz higher than the output frequency. So the output's 462, 6000, the input to the repeater is 467, 6000, and that gets automatically changed when you make the choice here, or it's automatically assigned when you use the appropriate DIY channel if your CPS uses banks. Now DIY 1 and all the way up to 24 are fine, they make sense, but once you've started customizing this list, adding a name instead of DIY 4 or DIY 5 is probably what you're going to do, so you don't have to remember which channel represents which repeater if there are several repeaters on the same channel where you live. Now, the other thing that most GMRS radios are going to allow you to do is to, when you get outside the range of the DIY channels, you can add in frequencies that are receive only. So the VHF call frequency in amateur radio for the 2-meter band is 146, 5200. So you can just type that in, and you see that there's nothing here because you can't transmit outside the GMRS range, but you could add in codes. You want wide, power settings high, which doesn't matter since you're not transmitting. You can add it to your scan list or not here. And then again, you could add the other information using an input box instead of the line of information as you did with your GMRS channels. And so if you were to have a ham repeater, you'd put that output frequency there. You'd put the codes that the repeater uses here so that you will be able to hear what the repeater was sending out. And you can have as many of those as you want. These frequencies can be used in the VHF band. It can also be used in that UHF band. And so that ham radio frequencies in the UHF band, you can schedule MERS frequencies and public service frequencies. All of those things can be added in here so long as they fall within this range right here that is selected for your scan frequency range. So if it's in the capability of the receiver to receive that frequency as defined here, then you can put that frequency here and you can tune to it directly, or you can tune to it via your scanning scheme that you've selected for your radio. Now, if you want to make a change, you just simply click on this, delete it, and when you kick out of the box, this all disappears. So now that we've gone through the programming process, we need to do a couple of things. First is that we're going to go to our file menu and we're going to save the file. And so in this case, we're going to save the file. I've got it in a online drive called Chirp Images, and we've got this set up as the GM-15 Pro, which is the radio I'm using. And you can see that I put a file in with this information just the other day, so I'm not going to resave it. But I use a file naming convention of the year, the month, and the day, and then the name of the radio, because I have a number of data files here stored in this particular location. With the file now stored, then I'll go back to program, and I'm going to write this information to the radio so that the changes that I've made find their way into the handset. So again, the write to data dialog box comes up. I'll press OK. The radio lit up, and this time the little LED on the top is flashing red. The data write was successful, so we'll press OK. We'll press cancel, and now the radio has rebooted itself into operating mode, and we're able to use the changes that we made in our programming on our handset. So when you're programming your GMRS radio, I hope you can see that using names for these repeater channels, especially the DIY channels, is the smart thing to do. Same thing with these extra frequencies, because with this radio, up to about 250 channels, it would be impossible to remember all those. So giving them a meaningful name is important. With a little planning, you can use various ranges of channels to put in various ranges or services that you may want to listen to. For example, you may choose to put the Marine band starting at channel 230. So when you get down to the Marine band, you don't have to be scanning up and down 100 channels or scrolling up and down 100 channels to get to the frequency that you may want to listen to. So, as you've seen, programming your GMRS radio using a compatible CPS is pretty easy once you get past the connections and basic software operation. It's especially helpful when you plan on programming a bunch of receive-only channels. These channels can include local ham repeaters with their corresponding CTCSS or DCS codes, Marine band channels if you live near a waterway, and some public service channels such as fire and police. Public service channels may not work, as emergency services often use complex systems and coded transmissions to avoid people who like to chase those services. I'll list a couple of frequencies and channel sources in the description below, but here are some to look for. First, mygmrs.com is a site dedicated to GMRS operations and has a searchable database of GMRS repeaters. You have to register for an account to gain access to all the info, but accounts are free. Next, repeaterbook.com is a similar website with a corresponding mobile app that also lists repeaters. Repeaterbook.com is focused mainly on ham repeaters on a variety of ham bands. The last thing I'll mention is a retailer, Better Safe Radios, who offers radios for preppers and other SHTF folks. They come pre-programmed with nearly 1,000 interesting frequencies. They have a PDF file of their frequencies available on their webpage, which you might find helpful when deciding what services to program into your radio, if any. Well, there you have it. Hopefully you're now all set to program your GMRS radio to let you enjoy its full potential. Hey, if you found this video helpful, please click the thumbs up button below the video and subscribe to the Gadget Talk channel. Click the bell icon to be notified when I post new videos. We've enjoyed steady subscriber growth this past year, and I really appreciate it. Thank you, and thanks for watching.